now in ocean exploration, you can help explore the last great frontier on Earth, and that's not an exaggeration. To the geography portion, we tend to think of the Pacific, Atlantic, and the other ocean areas as separate oceans, but really they are all connected. Water is exchanged between each of these areas. Animals migrate between these areas, so it's more appropriate to say there is one world ocean divided up into 5 regions. The Pacific is the oldest and the largest and the deepest, and there's quite a bit of U.S. territory in the Pacific, which I'll address on the next slide. The Atlantic is next in size, and then the Indian Ocean, slightly smaller, and most of that is below the equator. And then we have the Southern Ocean, which surrounds Antarctica, and it serves as the mixing bowl for the world ocean. And then the Arctic Ocean is the smallest and shallowest, but it's becoming increasingly important in geopolitics as the extent of sea ice shrinks and the ocean becomes more navigable. So, but we're looking at, the ocean covers about 70% of the Earth's surface, but it represents 99% of the habitable space on Earth. So, and the vast majority of that volume of living space lies beyond the shallow continental shelves in the deep sea. So here's a look at the Pacific and the U.S. territory there. When the U.S. Exclusive Economic Zone, the EEZ, was formally declared in 1983, that extended our rights to the fishing and mineral exploration to a point 200 miles from the coast. When we did that, the size of the U.S. more than doubled. The U.S. EEZ, marked with the gray shading here, covers about 4.6 million square miles. And so more than half of the U.S., 55%, lies in the ocean, and it's barely been explored. NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, has been directed to completely map the U.S. EEZ by 2030. So just meeting that goal is going to be a challenge. Along the west coast of the U.S., which is well mapped, there's still 25% of the EEZ that remains to be mapped there. Last summer, there were several expeditions focused on exploration of the U.S. territory in the Central Pacific. So this red path here, that's showing the expedition that I helped to lead in September of last year, and I'll show some of those highlights later on. But we mapped, and in the process of visiting some of these islands and seamounts out there, we mapped an area nearly equal to the size of the state of Maryland. And that took, that was 4 good weeks there. So it's a slow process, lots of mapping to do, but that's the first step in exploration. So before moving on from the geography portion of this talk, I want to return to that idea of one world ocean. This unusual projection, the Spillhouse projection of the world, gives a nice look at the oceans without distorting their relative sizes, the way the more familiar Mercator projection does. So most of the distortion in this projection is in South America here and China. But so we have the one world ocean. The near surface waters of the South Atlantic and the South Pacific and the Indian Oceans are stirred together by the Antarctic circumpolar current here, circling Antarctica, driven by the westerlies. And then there is a very dense bottom water formed on the continental margin of Antarctica that sinks down and spills into each of these ocean basins, the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian. So we have a lot to learn about how these waters spread along the seafloor. There's deep waters formed in the North Atlantic as well, not quite as dense as that Antarctic bottom water, but we have a lot to learn about these deep ocean processes, how that water spreads out, how it mixes, and how it affects our climate. This projection, the Spillhouse projection, it's named after Athelstan Spillhouse, and here's a little trivia question you could answer by chat. Anthony's going to be, Professor Santarelli, be keeping an eye on the chat for me during this talk. But if anybody knows what what invention Athelstan Spillhouse is associated with, without Googling, you'll get a bravo Zulu, a congratulations towards the end of the talk. But his projection, which he published in 1979, gives us a nice look also at the largest geological feature on Earth, the mid-ocean ridge system. So 40,000, approximately 40,000 mile long mountain range beneath the surface of the ocean, extending through each of the basins. This is where the Earth is coming apart. The tectonic plates are spreading, magma is rising up, creating new ocean floor. And the water, which seeps down into the cracks in the ocean crust and gets heated by those hot rocks and the magma, rises back up and bringing with it lots of chemicals, dissolved chemicals, and creating a really interesting ecosystem. These hot springs are called hydrothermal vents. And we'll take a look at those in this next slide, highlights those, some of them, with the glowing red dots here. So I'll toggle back and forth between these two slides. So looking at the North Atlantic here, this arc of hydrothermal vents is associated with that portion of the Mid-Atlantic ridge. So you've got hydrothermal vents along the mid-ocean ridge system. Here's one over a hotspot by Hawaii. And you've also got them along the rim of the Pacific. That's a subduction zone where tectonic plates are coming into contact rather than spreading apart as they do along the mid-ocean ridge system. They're coming into contact, and the ocean crust, which is denser, is subducting or being pushed down under the continental crust. Along all these plate boundaries, you've got volcanic activity, which is also creating these hydrothermal vents, as well as earthquakes. And those earthquakes are represented by the kind of the golden glow here. So the ocean crust is very active, and these plate margins are areas that are of interest for mapping and exploration. As of March of this year, there were a total of 721 hydrothermal vent fields, but there's probably well over 1,000. We've only explored 1% of the mid-ocean ridge system. We mapped about half of it, but explored visually only 1%. Hydrants yet to be discovered. So let me move on to the why and how of ocean exploration. Why? Well, in simple terms, our survival on Earth depends on a healthy ocean. We rely on the ocean for so much, for oxygen, food, medicine, energy. 98% of the marine species are benthic, living on the seafloor in the sediment. So we need to document the existence of marine ecosystems and protect the ones that are vulnerable due to all these stresses on the ocean today: pollution, overfishing, bottom trawling, and in the near future, seafloor mining. So about seafloor mining, we could give a whole nother brief on that, but the oil and gas reserves are to last for another 50 to 70 years or so based on our current usage and our reservoirs. Coal might last another 100 to 120 years. So while we pursue the development of renewable energy sources, we may also turn to the ocean to harvest methane hydrates. This white cube here is an example of a form of natural gas which exists as a solid in some areas of the coastal ocean seafloor. So we may mine methane hydrates as well as seafloor minerals, including manganese nodules, which are depicted in the upper right here. These nodules, these potato-sized nodules, contain cobalt and other minerals which are necessary for the production of cell phones, other electronics, batteries, solar panels. So a lot of the green technology that we're trying to develop may depend on harvesting minerals from the seafloor. But that's, companies have been assigned some areas in Central Pacific and may start some exploratory mining in the next 5 or 10 years. But we're going to have to document the environmental impact, and it's certainly going to disrupt life on the seafloor. There's a lot of history and culture associated with ocean exploration. There are approximately 3 million shipwrecks in the ocean. We've located about 10% of those, 300,000, and less than 30,000 have been surveyed or visited by divers. So Dr. Ballard, who's my boss when I'm working part-time and supporting the Ocean Exploration Trust, he likes to say there's more human history on the floor of the ocean than in all of the museums in the world. So lots to learn there. And in the lower left, to talk about human health as a motivation, sponges and other marine animals have evolved to live in a microbial soup, if you will. They're surrounded by threats and develop natural defenses to attacks by microbes. So marine species are being investigated as sources for anti-cancer, antimicrobial, antiviral, anti-inflammatory drugs, and treatments for several other conditions. New compounds are being discovered every year, and there's a long list of these compounds from marine species that are in the line for development. But there is currently a compound from a marine sponge that is used in cancer treatments today. So these are some of the motivations. It's a risky endeavor, very expensive, and you know, 40,000 a day to operate a ship at sea, 40 to 60,000 depending on what they're doing out there, and we're uncertain about what we'll find when we go out. So it is high risk, but the payoff, as Dr. Monk, one of my heroes, says, can be huge. So Walter Monk died last year at the age of 101, one of the greatest American or world's greatest oceanographers. But he said, you know, when success occurs, we're talking about findings that can turn an entire field on its head and make us rethink about the way we envision the way the ocean works and the way the Earth works. So here's an example of one of these finds which turned an entire field on its head. And Professor Fernandez gave a nice overview of this, the hydrothermal vents and the Galapagos Rift, the tube worms. He talked about this to the Earth Science Club a few weeks ago. But I'll just say a few words about it here. So the scientists were looking for warm water, therefore hot springs, which hadn't been documented yet, along these spreading centers that occur along the mid-ocean ridges, and the Galapagos Rift is part of that system. They went down in Alvin, the submersible, which is now, it's almost as old as me. It's been out there since '64, and it's being retrofitted this year up at Woods Hole to dive down to 6,500 meters. They were down there looking for hot water, and they came across these chemosynthetic ecosystems that nobody expected to be there. Dan mentioned that they didn't even have a biologist on the mission. So a lot of these discoveries, this is an example of a discovery that's made while you're looking for something else. These two worms are 4 to 6 feet in length. We sampled one that was 12 feet long in 2015 when we visited this area. But these red plumes are the lungs. They're comparable to lungs, which absorb oxygen and hydrogen sulfide from the water. And then there's trillions of bacteria in each tube worm that convert oxygen and hydrogen sulfide into carbohydrates, food. And so this is chemosynthesis occurring because you're way beyond the depths at which sunlight penetrates. These hydrothermal vents can be expected to occur all along that 40,000 mile long mid-ocean ridge system that I mentioned earlier. Here's a more recent find that kind of surprised folks who were looking for corals and sponges along Davidson Seamount off of Central California. And they came across in the last hour of the final dive, the only dive on the Davidson Seamount, that's in the last hour of their dive, they came across these rivers of octopuses aligned along cracks in the seafloor where seeps, previously unknown seeps, were sending out warm water. They were not equipped to study this. They didn't have the thermometer, the temperature probe on the remotely operated vehicle that went down at the time, but they could see the shimmering water. And then subsequent measurements, they revisited these sites in 2019 and this summer. They've measured temperatures as warm as 10 Celsius, which is still pretty cold, but compared to the ambient temperature of 1 degree Celsius, these are like hot tubs for the octopuses. So they estimated over 1,000. Actually, from the video that they obtained this summer, they counted over 2,000. They're mostly female of the Mus octopus robustus species. They're brooding eggs, and you can see some of the eggs in the lower right here. So the females will attach them to the rocks and then invert themselves and protect them from any predators. And I'll show you a little bit of the video from this summer's expedition. Let's see. Looks like it might not have the volume playing here, but you can see the shimmer here as they close in, and they're seeing some activity with this female octopus here, who is not inverted. And this appears to be the first instance where they've seen the female working with the eggs to glue them, cement them to these rocky outcroppings. And so that was a new find. Once they're cemented there, they, as I said, they invert themselves to protect the eggs. They've seen shrimp in the area trying to prey on hatchlings. There are a lot of other animals or species present. There are anemones, basket stars, shrimp. And so in addition to the questions that arise about what is drawing the octopus species to these seeps, is it the temperature, is it the chemicals coming out of the seeps, they also have the same question about the other associated species. What are they doing there? Are they predators, or are they also attracted to nutrients coming out of these seeps? The seeps themselves, the warm water was not expected because this is an extinct volcano. And here you see him grabbing a temperature probe to insert into the a crack in the crust here to try to measure the temperatures. They also, in 2019, deployed some sensors, put them in cracks in the crust here, and they retrieved them this summer. Those sensors were measuring temperature and dissolved oxygen over the year to see how things vary over time. So they retrieved those experiments this year. But yeah, what is it? Is it nutrients? Is it the temperature that might foster quicker development? And the seeps themselves were not expected. It's an extinct volcano that last erupted 9.8 million years ago. So this might be an instance where water is being heated by pressure within the crust, 10 degrees warmer than the ambient temperature. So like most exploration, what we're doing is coming across some findings that will lead to questions that the next generation of ocean explorers will help solve, will help answer. All right, I'll move on.
Hey, Emil, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. For sound, when you share your screen, there's like a checkbox near the bottom that I think says to connect your audio up as you share, so you can share that too. I think that's how you would do it if you wanted to do that, but I just wanted to just let you know.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it actually might be easier just for me to talk over it. I will say that what you hear when you tune into these videos on Nautilus Live is a lot of oohs and ahs because we're not all seasoned professionals out there, and it is always amazing when these unexpected discoveries come across your screen. That's part of the fun, I think, of the videos that get shared on CNN and elsewhere. It's partly what we see down there, but it's also the reaction of the scientists. Because we're just as surprised as anybody. So we've got this ocean exploration program now formalized. Up until this point, most of the deep ocean exploration and discovery was happening by chance, like the discovery of the hydrothermal vents, during cruises that are funded for hypothesis-driven research. But we now have a dedicated asset for exploration. NOAA operates a vessel called the Okeanos Explorer, and they also provide support to scientists who operate on board the Nautilus, which I've served on, and also the research vessel Falkor, which is operated by the Schmidt Ocean Institute. It's a big ocean. There's plenty of work to go around. But so these ships were continuing in the tradition of the U.S. exploration expedition. That was a worldwide cruise conducted by naval vessels during 1838 to 1842. So we've been mapping and exploring U.S. coastal waters and elsewhere for over 200 years, but we've only recently formalized a program for it. So the overall strategy of our national program is to simply obtain information on the biological, geological, chemical, and physical features of unexplored areas just to provide a baseline for future research and exploration, some future hypothesis-driven research. So the National Science Foundation, along with the Office of Naval Research, are overseeing the funding of some of this hypothesis-driven research. They're consultants in the planning and conduct of the ocean exploration. So NOAA is assisted by other federal agencies. The Navy does go out there and conduct military surveys, but sometimes in the process of doing that, they make discoveries. They're assisted by academia and other nonprofits. And here's a way that they bring this brain power together. So the Ocean Exploration Cooperative Institute was formed last year. It's one of 20 cooperative institutes which are supported by NOAA. This one is led by Dr. Ballard at the University of Rhode Island Grad School of Oceanography, but it includes these four universities and the nonprofit, the Ocean Exploration Trust, which operates Nautilus. Funded at $94 million for the next 5 years, and that could be a renewable contract. And they're just helping to explore unknown areas. They've been told to focus on the US EEZ. NOAA needs them to help develop new remotely operated vehicles that can operate in both deeper and shallower waters than previously explored. Integrate surface, aerial, and undersea autonomous vehicles for exploration operations. So these AUVs, unlike the ROVs, which are tethered to the ship, the AUVs are freely swimming or flying, and to help make the data more useful to a variety of customers. So that was some interesting news. So this is a shot of the URI campus and their research vessel near Narragansett, Rhode Island. So to better understand, here's some of the technologies that the Cooperative Institute and other partners with NOAA are helping to develop. To better understand and predict the changes in the ocean, we need to observe it frequently and in detail. We do this with a variety of technologies. The autonomous vehicles, I show the sail drone in the upper right here. They were recently used to conduct seafloor mapping off the north coast of Alaska. They traveled autonomously from San Francisco up through the Bering Straits, along the 30 to 50 meter contour along the north coast of Alaska and came back. So they're going to become increasingly important in the future. We need frequent observations in order to understand how ocean conditions change in time. Satellites help with that. And we need densely spaced observations in order to understand how ocean conditions change from place to place. So we need a mix of technologies. The ones that I'll discuss today are the seafloor mapping sonar that we operate off the ships, some satellite data, and the remotely operated vehicles, these unmanned submersibles that we deploy from the ships. Before you can explore the seafloor, you have to know where you're sending your submersibles. Imagine going into a strange city without Google Maps, and also with all the lights out. So you've got a flashlight, just find your way around. That's the lights on our submersibles, but we need a good detailed map to begin with. So this multi-beam technology, which was developed in the 60s for the Navy, is the state of the art. Covers broad swaths of the seafloor up to 4 miles wide with each ping. And but there's still a call for this old single beam or echo sounder technology. That's what the sail drones were using off the north slope of Alaska. Simpler, less data processing, and so you can put those on an AUV. Here's a comparison of the multi-beam data to satellite. So the cartoon in the upper left depicts the coverage of the seafloor obtained by multi-beam sonar. Then the smooth, lighter area sort of represents the bathymetry as estimated from satellite data before you map it in detail. So to map an area, the ship is going to drive back and forth, slightly overlapping each of these swaths of sonar data, like mowing the lawn. And in the upper right is a seamount that we mapped for the first time during our expedition this summer. We knew a seamount was present based on estimates made by satellite data, which showed just the smooth hump. And the detailed data from the sonar, you can see there's ridges, steep ridges extending out in 4 or 5 directions here. And that allowed us to plan a route. A thin white line here is the route that we followed with our remotely operated vehicle. So the satellite estimates, here is a comparison in the bottom of the smooth mound that the satellite data would suggest and the more detailed measurements from the sonar data. The satellite estimates have a coarse spatial resolution, about 5 kilometers or so, and they might be off in the depth estimate by several hundred feet. So it's not something that you can use for submarine navigation or planning the route of an ROV. But it does help to focus our efforts on areas that should be mapped in more detail by ships. The satellite data has helped us discover hundreds of previously unmapped seamounts. So when you combine the satellite data with the depth measurements from ship, you get this nice view of the global seafloor. But bear in mind that as of June of this year, only 19% of the seafloor has been mapped to modern standards. And that's due to the Seabed 2030 project, a global, an international effort to pull together information from private industry as well as governments and get it out there. And so we, in that effort, bumped up the number from about 15% up to 19%. Still a long way to go. Oh, before I forget, so the satellite data that I've mentioned is from radar altimeters that are measuring the smooth surface of the ocean and then inferring the size of seafloor features based on those measurements. This Saturday, NOAA and Europe, the European Space Agency, and a few other organizations over there are looking forward to launching their Sentinel-6 Michael Freilich satellite sometime on Saturday. You should be able to see it on NASA Live TV if you want to tune in. It's the latest radar altimetry mission. It's continuing in the series of radar altimeters that have been flown by NASA and NOAA. And the European partners decided to name it after Michael Freilich, a NASA scientist who's been deeply involved in the missions, who passed away, I think, this past year. And so that was a nice touch from the European partners, but that's coming up. So we need, these radar altimeters are doing much more than just estimating seafloor bathymetry. They're measuring global sea level rise, monitoring events like El Nino and La Nina. So really important technology. All right, so on to the equipment that we're using after we've got a good map, we're ready to send these ROVs down to the seafloor. So here is Argus on the lower left and Hercules. Argus is suspended from the ship by a steel cable. It's hanging like a dead weight. And then Hercules is tethered to Argus by a flexible tether. And so Argus absorbs the ship's motion while Hercules is free to explore the seafloor without being yanked around by the pitching and rolling that's going on. So imagery and data from both ROVs are sent up through a fiber optic line that runs through the tether and the steel cable back up to the ship. And the Hercules is positively buoyant, slightly positively buoyant. So if something were to happen to that tether and they had to cut it, if it became tangled, Hercules would slowly rise up to the surface. This yellow part on Hercules is syntactic foam. It's a foam composed of like glass beads, air-filled glass beads in a resin that will not be compressed by the incredible pressures that are present on the seafloor. So here they are on deck. They're launched with a crane in the case of Hercules and a winch that runs through a cable and an A-frame in the case of Argus. So they'll put Hercules over the side, it'll swim behind the ship, and then Argus is lowered down into the water, and they'll both descend together. And so Argus's cameras keep an eye on Hercules as Hercules explores the seafloor in detail. They've both got high intensity lights, similar to what's used in theatrical productions, and high definition cameras. And this photo of Hercules, I got this at sunset. It shows, it's a nice shot of the manipulator arm that the Predator that helps obtain samples down there. So predator can snip off coral or sponge samples, grab heavy rocks, put them in a drawer that slides back into Hercules, and then can be brought up to the surface for safekeeping. They can also trigger water bottles to snap shut. So we're taking water samples for analysis, not only of the ocean chemistry, but also we're looking for DNA now. This is a less intrusive way to study what is living in the ocean. We're building up this database of marine species so that we can compare DNA collected at various locations to the database. This is an area where future engineers can contribute in designing manipulator arms that are more gentle to pick up some of these soft marine creatures without damaging them. We also need quiet ROVs. Hercules has thrusters, electric thrusters, to hover and lift up or move side to side along the seafloor. Those are pretty noisy, and so that may scare away some of the species we're interested in studying. So we could use quieter propulsion systems as well. So the ROVs are controlled by pilots who sit in the control van. So this is a look inside the control van. It's a room full of computers on the upper deck of the ship. And here's a little graphic in the bottom portion of the slide here that's showing you the location of that control van. It's basically a shipping container loaded with computers and air conditioning. So the ROV Hercules pilot is sitting in the front row. Argus pilot's next to him. There's a video engineer who controls these cameras. A navigator who's talking to the bridge watch on the ship to position the ship carefully a few meters at a time using these bow thrusters and stern thrusters. There's a science communicator in the front row fielding questions from the internet audience. And then in the back row is the science team, a data logger who's recording everything that we see, doing screen captures in addition to the video that's being collected. There's a watch leader, and then the chief scientist is guiding the mission, and that scientist is chatting with scientists ashore and then making decisions on where to go and what to sample. The control van's manned typically 24 hours a day while we're exploring, and each watch team stands 2 4-hour watches a day. So we can operate like this for about 72 hours, and then it's time to give the watch teams a break and bring the vehicles up. But that's quite an improvement over the manned submersibles that are limited to less than a day before they've got to come back up. So satellite communications technology allows these scientists on shore to participate in real time with our expeditions. As I mentioned, they're chatting with the lead scientists. So the video and data from Hercules and Argus streams up that fiber optic cable to the control van on Nautilus, but it's also sent via satellite to a receiving station and then on to the Inner Space Center at the University of Rhode Island. That's like mission control for a NASA mission. So from our control hub in the Inner Space Center, video and data they're distributed directly to some scientists' computers, scientists who have signed up to participate in the mission, but they're also sent out to the web. And so this telepresence frees us from the constraints of the ship. It allows more scientists to be involved with the expedition. While I was out there in the Central Pacific, I was chatting with geologists in California, some experts on the East Coast, a coral expert in Philly at Temple University, as well as a scientist in Russia who was a specialist in some of these benthic species. So it is really, it's another crucial technology that's come to bear on ocean exploration. It's like creating an international laboratory. Nautilus Live is the online home for the streaming. The video highlights are there if they're not conducting a dive. Currently, Nautilus is wrapping up the 2020 season with some seafloor mapping off of Southern California, contributing to that EEZ mapping. But for those who just can't get enough of this, right after my talk at noon, you could visit Nautilus Live, and there's going to be a live Q&A session on seafloor mapping and seafloor geology. coming up at noon here. But you can visit Nautilus Live to see videos from past expeditions, photo galleries, blogs, and you can also read about the careers of the folks who are out there. By clicking on their profiles, you'll see their biography, and students can kind of get a feel for the different paths that these folks have taken to get where they are in their profession. All right, so just some quick highlights from last summer's expedition. So during our 4-week expedition, we traveled over 3,000 nautical miles, 3,500 statute miles from Pago Pago, Samoa, some waypoints along the way for 7 ROV dives, and then finishing up in Honolulu, Hawaii. So just by comparison, the continental US is 2,800 miles wide. So we covered, this was a 3,000 mile path, but we covered a lot more of that because we were mowing the lawn in some areas to do that detailed seafloor mapping. But our mission was to improve our knowledge about the biology and geology of the Pacific Remote Islands Marine National Monument, or PRIM for short. This monument was established in 2006 and expanded in 2016, but it's been barely explored. We conducted 7 dives, as I said, with the ROVs. We mapped some new seafloor features and deployed 5 drifting buoys while we were transiting. Those buoys are still out there measuring wave heights. This enlargement, so I'm going to enlarge this Howland and Baker portion of PRIM, of the National Monument. This enlargement shows that the first 4 dive sites, they were located along these steep, rugged seamounts and sloping islands. The same is true for the other 3 dives further north. So we intentionally focused our cruise plan on the exploration of these steep features. That's where you stand a chance of a good payoff. For this reason, these seamounts provide very good habitat for filter feeders like deep sea corals and sponges. The currents, the steady currents which flow over these seamounts create these spiral eddies to focus nutrients above the seamount. The tides that sweep past these features 2 times a day generate subsurface waves, internal waves that have strong currents. And so this is all good for filter feeders. And additionally, the substrate is hard. These are volcanic features, basalt, so very hard substrate compared to the sediment-covered seafloor, which it makes it difficult for these filter feeders to feed. So here's an example, just like that cartoon, of a table mount, or guyot, a flat-top seamount that we mapped last summer. These are, when Admiral Harry Hess mapped these during World War II, it kind of triggered his thinking about seafloor spreading, and that in turn formed the theory of plate tectonics. These guyots were at the surface. They are volcanic features that were worn down by wave action while they're at the surface, and then they gradually sink as the crust cools and contracts, and the plate motion takes these seamounts either away from a mid-ocean ridge or a hot spot in the crust. These seamounts in the Central Pacific were formed by hot spots. They're far from a mid-ocean ridge. But as they're transported away and they sink, that flattened, what was an island is now a guyot, or table mount. So this one was 1,600 meters deep. We haven't got a date on this feature yet, but most of the seamounts in this area are 65 to 70 million years old. So that works out to sinking about 20, 25 meters per million years. We did see some beautiful sponges and corals, which was our main focus right from the get-go. This is an example of one of my favorites, the beautifully spiraling Iridogorgia, which kind of looks like a fireworks display. But these corals and sponges they transform their environment in a way that can be compared to the way beavers transform a stream with their dams. They're ecosystem engineers. They provide habitat and food for other species, and they even serve as nurseries for some. So unlike the shallow corals that some of the oceanography students might be familiar with, these deep water corals do not have the symbiotic algae, the zooxanthella, that provide nutrients for them. They're way beyond the reach of sunlight, so no photosynthesis can take place there. These corals are relying on filtering nutrients from the water as it drifts past. So that's why they like those strong currents. So different vulnerabilities for the different corals. The shallow water coral reefs, so they're vulnerable to overfishing, warming, which causes bleaching, pollution, and damage from shipping. The deep water corals are kind of insulated from that. They're generally protected from temperature swings, but they can be damaged by bottom trawling, oil exploration, and seafloor mining, which, as I mentioned, could be coming down the pike in 5 to 10 years. So we need to document their location and the species, all the species present, the resident species that seem to remain around these corals, as well as the transient species which might interact with them temporarily. We need to understand how these food webs work. On our third dive, we saw quite a few of the large deep sea corals, including this 6-foot wide. It's a black coral, although it looks cream colored. It's called a black coral because of its fine black calcium carbonate skeleton. This one was providing a home, or at least a way station, for 20 of these squat lobsters, these leggy guys sticking out with their claws. They keep their claws out to snatch food out of the water column. 20 squat lobsters or so, a few crinoids, which are also called sea lilies. They're relatives of the sea stars. So this coral colony, it could be hundreds of years old. A black coral sampled near Hawaii was found to be 4,000 years old. Not on our expedition, a previous one. So these black corals are called sequoias of the deep. Happy to see some of them down there. On the second dive, we encountered possibly a new species of octopus. So experts are confident that it's a member of the cerateuthid family of octopuses, but we're not sure about the species. This one that's going to come out of the darkness here is about 4 to 5 feet in length, put on quite a show for the camera. And this is one of these videos that was picked up by several TV stations, so you might have seen this one. It's got some really large fins on the side of its head. They're actually larger than the head itself. They look like ears, so some refer to these as a Dumbo octopus. And there's another species that moves around in a similar fashion with these fins called Dumbo octopus. These are large, though. Not very well studied or sampled. It's hard to, this is not something we could bring up with the ROV. And so we don't know how many are out there. They seem to be prevalent in Arctic waters. And unlike the octopuses that I showed earlier, the deep sea octopuses that lay a clutch of eggs, the Cerateuthidea lays a single large egg right directly on the seafloor and then leaves it. I don't believe that they will tend it the way these other deep sea octopuses do. Seems like a pretty vulnerable arrangement, but just a beautiful show that it put on. So there are scientists who go back and look at this video to learn as much as they can about the different species that we come across. We've got a circus tent here. And there's some really fine detail in the bell that is probably helping to transport nutrients to the octopus. It's believed they feed off of crustaceans on the seafloor. And then he stretches out here to his full length, maybe closer to 6 feet here. All right, I'll move on to another one that surprised us. The Deep Staria jelly. I don't have time to show a little bit of this video. The Deep Staria, we were just panning left, and boom, this ghost is hovering right by this cliff. And really surprised us for about 3 to 4 feet long. Another rarely observed species, and just floating along there. And then he put on quite a show. It's a shapeshifter, but it seems to have this isopod, this red relative of the pill bug, going along for the ride. We're not sure the arrangement there, if it's parasitic or not, but deep starias that have been observed, they all seem to have one of these pill bugs or isopods inside them. So some of the crew is joking that the isopod's actually steering the jelly. We have no idea what's going on there, but they're getting a good ride. We came across a beautiful coral colony on this seamount in international waters. It was the only one that we dove on outside of the boundaries of the National Monument. But one of the reasons we visited this seamount is because its depth was previously estimated to be 22 meters, and it would have been a navigational hazard to submarines. Our measurements showed it had a minimum depth of 1,300 meters. So not a threat for navigation, but a beautiful garden of corals and sponges. So this is the type of high density, high diversity ecosystem that biologists try to model in order to predict where we might discover other similar ecosystems. One of our planned dives was canceled due to heavy weather. So here we are in 8 to 10 foot combined seas, 20 knots of wind. That's just too much to put the ROVs over the side safely. So you always need a plan B or C when you're at sea. Signed up to Johnston Atoll where we were planning to dive, and we added a dive there. So we did one dive way down there, 2,500 meters to 2,000, and then a shallower dive. So lots of these interesting sponges, hundreds and hundreds of deep sea sponges, a lot more of the Iridogorgia corals, and when we got in the shallower waters, some feisty eels. This conger eel is apparently aggressive to divers. It didn't seem phased at all by Hercules present. And the moray eels were poking out of coral rubble. Beautiful creatures. They're moray eels. There's over 200 species. They're found all over the world. So some of the accomplishments, for the geologists who might be tuned in, some columnar basalt really rocked us. No pun intended, but usually you see pillow lava in the ocean seafloor, not columnar basalt. So this may have formed inside pillow lava that then broke and exposed this. Still trying to figure that out. But we mapped in areas the size of the state of Maryland. We just mapped 3 new seamounts, 160 samples collected, and over 160 hours of video. And the core, in addition to those accomplishments, you form some lifelong friendships out there. When you serve at sea, it's a unique group of people that come together with a wide range of expertise. So we've got engineers, systems, electrical, computer, and video engineers, oceanographers from all 4 subdisciplines: biological, chemical, geological, and physical, seafloor mappers or geographic information system analysts, marine historians and archaeologists, and science communicators. So, there's always going to be a need for those folks to decide, even as we become more dependent on autonomous vehicles, we're going to need humans involved to help study and communicate those findings. But I'll just finish off here with Bob Ballard's quote. This new age of exploration, we're going to learn the secrets of territories beyond even Thomas Jefferson's wildest imagination when he sent Lewis and Clark out to explore the Louisiana Territory. So that's all I've got time for here. I'm going to stop sharing and see if we've got some questions over chat. How are we doing, Anthony?
There we go. Firstly, Emil, thank you. That was magnificent. That was so good. Just FYI, I kind of didn't hit the record button until like midway through the first slide. So, but luckily we got the good stuff. And I'll have to see how the recording all goes. I've never done it before on Zoom, but hopefully everything's good. Yeah, we have a time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. There were more. And what I actually did was I messaged the group and basically said, I would figure you'd be happy to answer questions or email if you wanted. So if people wanted to, actually get answers through email, to provide an email to me or on spreadsheet, and then we can do that. But and I'll send you the questions as well. But yeah, we have time for a couple. I'm just going to pull that up real quick for me. A good question was, what are some good websites to take a look at sort of seafloor study, observation, and research? It was a student who's interested, actually.
Um, yeah, the U.S. Geological Service has some good information on the minerals that are down there that are of interest for seafloor mining. Nautilus Live has some good info on what we've visited in the past, what we've studied, some blogs about it. And I would check out Woods Hole as well. They're one of the leaders in the field. So yeah, there's just a few. NOAA, of course. The NOAA has an Office of Ocean Exploration and Research that's leading this national program, and so they've got some good information.
Awesome, very good, thank you. Let's see, another question from another student, Gary. You mentioned that life was not expected to be found in the Marianas Trench in 1977, such that a biologist wasn't actually on board for that. Although, room was limited probably, but would it have been possible to actually have him on there if he was selected in terms of quarters, in terms of conditions? That's what he asked.
On the ship, the Alvin, the submersible Alvin's got room for 2 scientists and a pilot, so pretty cramped. But we've certainly had biologists go down since then. By the way, that was at the Galapagos Rift in the Eastern Pacific, not the Marianas Trench in the Western Pacific.
Okay, very good. And then maybe one more, and then we'll wrap up. So again, for those of you who did not have a question addressed, I apologize. If you want to provide an email to me or to the sign-in sheet, we can have Emil address the question at that point. So the last question was actually an interesting one about mining. There was a concern about the damage that would do. So in terms of that, is that something that's considered in these projects, such that be important for environmental protection?
Yeah, so there is some research being funded to explore the impact of the plumes. So one of the big concerns is when the ships dredge up this material from the seafloor, it's brought up to the ship through pipes, the waste material is going to be dumped overboard. And that's going to lead to sediment plumes that extend for maybe hundreds or thousands of miles. We're trying to document, how, depending on where you release the sediment, where will these plumes go, and what that if it's sent back down to the seafloor, it's going to be suffocating some filter feeders in the immediate area, but maybe you would minimize the extent of the plume that way. But that's an area of concern, as well as what is living on these nodules that are going to be dredged up. Also, the chimneys or the hydrothermal vents that I mentioned are another area of interest for mining. So you got the nodules, you got the chimneys on the vents, and then the crusts on the seamounts themselves that could be scraped off for the manganese in the crusts that form very slowly over millions of years. I really appreciate the great turnout, and I'm sorry I was so long-winded, but I will try to follow up on questions by email.
I'm long-winded too, but the difference is you have a lot cooler stuff to show, so that helps. But no, you're perfectly fine. You did great. Everyone loved it.
I forgot to show this. Let's see, this prop I brought. This was a regularly sized styrofoam cup. We send these down on Argus in a net bag, and then they're squashed by the ocean pressure down there. So just to show you what it does, this was a 12-ounce cup that is now about an inch long. So the pressures that the marine life are adapted to, it's incredible, but it's also an engineering challenge for the vehicles that we send down.
As Elise said just now in chat, whoa, in capital letters. That is pretty awesome. Yeah, that is cool. That's one of the coolest props I've ever heard. That's awesome. All right. Well, I think it's a little after 12. I thank everyone for sticking around. A couple extra minutes to handle some questions, for Emil to handle some questions. Again, Emil, you might want to go to the chat one time before we go, because you got a lot of love for your talk. Everyone loved it. Very interesting. Thank you so much for taking the time on a Friday, as we get busier towards the end of the semester, going towards Thanksgiving and so on, to present that. Folks, if you make sure to sign in if you haven't yet. I saw most people did, but a few may have not. students who need to sign in with their instructor in class just to make sure to get credit if need be for their talk, please do so, or for the attending the talk. And faculty, of course, too, we're going to update the IPD for that. So please give that information as needed. And again, any interest in any of our clubs, you can contact me. My email is asantorelli@aacc.edu. Elise, did you have anything else before we wrap up?
No, just once again, Dr. Petruncio, that was really, really great talk. I think the chat, when you go look at it later, it's like everybody was just saying thank you and had effusive compliments. That was really wonderful and enlightening. And then seeing all those beautiful sea animals at the end was really lovely.
Thanks, and thank you, everybody. Yeah, I'm taking a look at the chat here. Nice comments. Have a great weekend. When you're doing your de-stressing and your slow breathing, remember to thank the ocean for every other breath you take. 50% of that oxygen is coming from marine creatures.
I will use that fact in my oceanography class. All right. Thank you very much, Emil. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day and weekend. And Kimberly, I signed you in. Don't worry. All right. Take care, everyone.
Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Oh, Emma, wait. Can you wait? Emma, 1 second.
I am. Yeah, I'm going to copy the chat.
Oh, good. And then the only other thing was, if you can, someone requested, and I think we probably would have done this anyway, the slide deck for this, so that we can maybe have that tied in with the recording. Hopefully the recording turns out okay. Then we could have everything together if that's okay with you. You may have stuff in there you may want to trim down or whatever before the masses see it, but.
Yeah, sure. And for anybody who's still tuned in, my email address in chat. My personal email address.
Yep, there we go.
And Anthony can all help connect folks with me.
Yep. Emil and I do talk. It's true. Yep.
All right. Well, that was fun.
It was fun. I think everyone loved it. I really do. It really did go great.
And I've copied the comments. So if there's any questions out there, I'll go back and track down the folks.
Yeah, that would be good. And I think only a couple of people did provide their email, which is great. So I can give you that, so you can provide them with the answers. There's one person I think who gave a couple questions couldn't get to, so we'll definitely work that out. Yep.
Okay, and the slide deck's over 100 meg, so I'll put that on Google Drive and you can download it.
Okay. Well, yeah, we'll work that one out. All right.
All righty.
All right, Emil. Thank you so much for everything. Really appreciate you taking the time helping the clubs out. Thank you. Great job.
Sure thing. Have a great weekend.
All right, take care, everybody. Bye-bye.